Hello, everyone. Thanks for coming today. We are now beginning the session. So we will watch short video clip first, and then we'll start the panel discussion.
Tucked under the 405 at Venice Boulevard is a stretch of sidewalk some 40 people call home. At least once a week, LAPD walks up. An army of sanitation workers moves in, clean up usables, soft urine, mountain, they ice the sidewalk, and then leave. 10 minutes, come back, building there under the 405 is a glitter of hazardous products on the street. Your living choice. Dylan rummaging the trash here, search of some eat. But within minutes, people are back, rebuilding their life under the 405. The sidewalk is again littered with the hazardous byproducts of life on the streets. You're living out your choice. We met Dylan Brumley rummaging through the trash here in search of something to eat. And we saw him picking up a dirty needle. You can use that needle. He says these cleanups never keep the area clean for more than a few hours. And neighbors who live near the encampment agree.
It was not a good use of our tax dollars.
Roman Samley lives 5 houses from the tent city. He says when the cops force the homeless people out during those cleanups, they move into the neighborhood, leaving behind piles of garbage, which the sanitation workers never clean up.
But it pushes the trash into our streets. Our streets are worse after cleanups.
And worse because of this too. The homeless routinely leave their encampment to urinate on the streets of the neighborhood, and they defecate on the residential streets where children play. When sanitation workers do their cleanups, they stay inside the yellow tape, ignoring piles of human waste just a few feet away.
Defecating and urinating all over the streets. You're aware of this?
Yes.
Pepe Garcia of LA's Department of Sanitation. If you have a pile of feces a few feet outside an encampment, they should clean it up.
They should.
Garcia is in charge of these cleanups, which are supposed to ensure healthier conditions in and around these tent cities.
That's the main goal.
But that's not happening, say neighbors who live near this homeless encampment in the valley, near this one in Echo Park, and the people who overlook this one in Hollywood.
If you come back the day afterwards, after a major cleaning, it looks the same or worse.
The I-Team obtained and analyzed records of all homeless encampment cleanups and found the city conducted nearly 15,000 of those cleanups last year alone. That cost taxpayers $31 million just to pay the sanitation workers, another $4.7 million to pay the cops assigned to protect them. And no one could tell us the cost of DOT officers who control traffic around the cleanups, or the cost of these city outreach workers who hand out snacks. What's the total cost of the cleanups?
I wouldn't have that number for you.
Is there anyone in the city keeping track of the total cost of these cleanups?
I wouldn't be able to comment. I don't know.
There's an absolute better way that the city could be spending all this money.
Homeless advocate Becky Dennison and infectious disease doctor Jeffrey Klausner of UCLA have been to the 405 encampment and say conditions like these are a breeding ground for disease.
There have been outbreaks like Shigella, Salmonella, E. coli, hepatitis A.
Dr. Klausner says the city should use some of that cleanup money to place porta potties at every big encampment, something they've done at just 12 out of the hundreds of tent cities in LA.
Going to the restroom is just a basic human need, and it does create a health crisis to not have a bathroom.
And she says the city needs to place a lot more trash cans near homeless encampments. At that 405 site, there's just one can on each end of the encampment, and they're always overflowing. How many trash cans should the city put out at that encampment?
At least 6 or 7, or a larger dumpster.
Trash is not the issue.
Dylan Brumley has another idea. He thinks the city could redirect some of those cleanup dollars to offering drug treatment to addicts like himself and help for the mentally ill. Help that could get these people off the streets for good.
With the millions of dollars that they're spending on the trash pickup, I don't think it would be impossible to have some sort of counseling.
You go in and you clean up these encampments and they're dirty again within hours?
This is the best I can do today. Will it get better tomorrow? I absolutely believe it will.
In the wake of our investigation, sanitation officials tell us they will retrain their workers to clean up trash and human waste in the neighborhoods around encampments, not just near the tents. We'll be watching in the months and years to come to see how your tax dollars are being spent to clean up LA's streets of shame.
Okay, the panel members, please have a seat. Come to the front. So this idea of having a panel discussion started like, my meeting with like other experts too. Like, I've been just one of those residents living in LA, and I had exactly the same questions you had. And why it's only getting worse? What's the plan? Can we even resolve this issue anyways? And it doesn't seem like it's kind of working out at all. And it even feels like frustrated. So I was having those questions, and then I started kind of reaching out and meeting some experts in the homelessness. It has a lot of aspects. Many people, like pretty much everybody, will agree in saying, it's a complicated issue. It involves a lot of different issues like street cleaning too, and housing, and mental health, and there's so many things going on in connection with this homelessness issue. And so I was meeting one of the gentlemen who was in a development business. He was having pretty much all disagreements with my idea, in every whatever I was talking about. But interesting thing was I just wanted to take it as an opportunity to learn from him, and I've been asking questions to him. And then he had knowledges and, experiences, so he could answer my questions. And then that started giving me kind of good information. And then, so it was productive. Like, it didn't have to be like debate. I have that belief, like, as long as we can discuss together, and then share thoughts and knowledges and skills and whatever information together, and we put them all together, and then at least we'll know what's really going on, what problems are really existing here, and how we can make things better. So, and then I was like, maybe we should have this kind of panel discussion, like having experts, who has been kind of working on homeless issues. And here we are. So we have, good panelists today. So let me introduce them briefly. First one, Mr. Joe Groover from NBC Channel 4. He has been working for NBC since 2003. He's nationally known for his undercover investigations about like consumer fraud and government wrongdoings. And it was kind of interesting. He recently covered one story about like property that was never really cleaned up. Property owner called like 23 times the city. They did not really respond. But when he appeared with the camera and he called, within an hour, they came and cleaned it up. So yeah, that was a very interesting story. Anyways, so that's Mr. Groover. Would you welcome him, please? And next, Miss Cristian Jackson, sitting there. She's I think like you guys, like she's a born Angelino, and she lived in LA for her whole life, I guess. And then she has been working for the community as the organizer, activist, and advocate, especially for the kind of groups whose voices are not kind of enough and sufficiently heard for these community issues. So, and she has been joining the LASA's homeless count on street, and she has very interesting view about this issue. So she's gonna kind of in a way share her thoughts from in a way very interesting different angle. So please welcome Ms. Jackson. And Mr. Cristian Ahumada. Here you go. He's from Clifford Beers Housing, And I visited one of his projects. Like, they are not necessarily using just government funds. They have been trying to look for the alternative ways of like raising funds. I think many times they were using, I think, federal tax crediting through the certain bank. And then they've been, even using traditional model, like everybody knows, like, that when we just try to build a housing, the cost is like more than $500,000 per unit. So we are like, why? It's so expensive, right? And then Mr. Ahumada's group, they've been kind of trying to make it cheaper, but they were more like working with traditional model, right? So, and then I think one of the projects I visited, they could make one for like a little bit over like $350,000 per unit. That's still expensive, but that's a great job compared to like, typical projects that is spending over $500,000 each unit. So, and he's an expert in like urban and regional planning and housing, commercial development, tax credit, and a lot of all these kind of, complicated and hard things, I guess. So please welcome Mr. Ahumada. And Mr. Beau Donohoe, sitting in the middle. He's financial analysis. He's an expert for financial analysis, project underwriting, and project management. And that is, I think, mainly related to development business. And he's from Relevant Group. This group, what this group is doing is interesting. So they were looking for alternative way of building housings so that they could save money. So they are doing a modular model. It's like, Lego blocks, you just put them together. So, and each unit is like Lego block. And then that will be, according to him, costing only like $130,000 per unit. That's like more than 4 times less than typical cost. So, he's going to share about more information about that. So please welcome Mr. Donohoe. And Mr. David Likens, sitting at the end. And he has been serving as the CEO of the Ranchi at Dove Tree. That's a nationally recognized addiction treatment program. Let's say we build a housing. So what? We assume they would be willing to go in. But according to what I hear, not necessarily. So we have that issue. And also, the homeless persons having mental health issue or drug addiction issues, they need more than just housing. So how should we approach these homeless persons to really help them? That's another question we need to answer to. So for that, we invited Mr. Likens. Please welcome. And Mr. Kevin Hirai, sitting in the middle. He's from Flyawayhomes. It's a big nonprofit, very dedicated in helping homeless persons. And his group was also trying to look for alternative way of saving costs for building housings. Spending $500,000, that's not going to really do it. It's just too much of costs. So they tried a container model. It did not really work, right? It did not really save costs. And they also tried that modular model. So he, I think, has some quite successful stories with good, successful examples about these modular models. And so he's going to share his experience and then, how that worked and, all this information and thoughts. So please welcome Mr. Hirai. Yeah, and my name is Jeong. I'm going to be moderating today's panel discussion. And like I said at the beginning, I was just a resident. I did not really know much about this homelessness issue. But in a way, I'm a fast learner, I guess. And I'm good at asking questions because I'm a lawyer in a way. So, when you ask the right question, you get the right answer. That's how you get the solution. For problem solving. That's what I'm trying to do. So I'm learning from all these experts. I've been meeting more than the panelists here. And so the plan is generally at the end, I'll repeat that, but Today, we are covering, like you just heard from the panel introductions, we are covering some of the issues involving homelessness, but we have a lot more issues involved that everybody knows, right? So this panel discussion, I think, will happen like 2 or 3 times more down the road, so that we cover all those stories and we put all the thoughts and ideas together, and then that will make a big picture, like as an alternative solution. It's an interesting thing. I mean, I like this kind of saying by Albert Einstein. He said, like, it's insane. Like, you repeat the same trial or experiments again and again, and expect you will have a different result. So once you fail, that means you should really go back and look over what has happened, why it failed. Only then you can do better kind of execution of new plan later. So we should not be repeating this. We should get out of this, in a way, vicious circle of failing again and again. So, that's what we are trying to do. And then we are going to make some good suggestions today, which is why I'm calling this like discussion, not really debate. And one common thing among, I think, audience and the panel members too, we all want the solution for homeless persons, right? Homelessness issue, and we want to end this failure being repeated. And then that means we need to take a different approach, than what has been done during the last multiple years. So with that, you just saw the video clip that was news from NBC Channel 4. So I will start with Mr. Joe Groover by asking, so what's going on the street? So
First, thanks for, is this working? No, that's not mine. It's yours. I guess this is mine. Thanks for having me, and I'm actually really looking forward to hearing from all of you who bring good information, unique perspective, and I'm really looking forward to learning and asking you guys some questions. I have a unique role at NBC Channel 4 in that about 9 months ago, I went to my bosses and I said, we need to really, really focus on this crisis, this humanitarian crisis facing our city. And my bosses said, you're an investigative reporter. We want you to spend 100% of your time doing stories and really investigating problems and solutions. So that's what I do now. I think I'm in a unique position, at least on this panel, in that every day of my working life now, I'm out on the streets, in homeless encampments, talking to the people that live there in detail. And I find that the people who are living on the streets are usually very open and honest to talking with me. And what I now see, spending 9 months almost every day out on the streets, the reality of what I see, I think, is very different than what the politicians and the elected leaders are telling the city about this problem. This is truly a humanitarian crisis of epic proportions, just like a hurricane or an earthquake that would leave 60,000 people homeless. This is the same kind of humanitarian crisis, and I think so far we are not seeing a response to it to treat it like it is the emergency that it really is. If there was an earthquake that hit this city and left 60,000 people on the streets, they might call in FEMA or the National Guard. There would be emergency plans to deal with the situation immediately. I'm not seeing that. It was only about 2 weeks ago that Mayor Garcetti held a press conference and finally said, this is a humanitarian crisis, this is an emergency. I was unfortunately on vacation, or I would have been at that press conference and said to the mayor, this situation is getting worse, but it's been this way for years. Why did it take you years to say, we're going to treat this like an emergency? Every day we are hearing in the city of Los Angeles, which is really what I'm focusing on now. This is a problem throughout California, but I'm focusing on this big city of LA. And I'm seeing new ideas discussed every day by politicians, but I still don't think I see an emergency response. As Jake referenced a story I did just about a week ago, we get tips every day at NBC about different aspects of the homelessness crisis. This was related. We were told about a pile of uncollected garbage that was a building high 12 tons. It had been accumulating for a year. We went out there. I've seen everything in Skid Row and across the city. I had never seen a pile of uncollected garbage crawling with giant rats as big as cats running around. So we did a story. And I called up the mayor's press secretary. I said, I want to talk to Mayor Garcetti about the trash problem. And he said, well, he's at a mayor's conference in Hawaii. I said, well, can you get him on the phone with me? And I got the mayor on the phone, and I told him about this. And I said, he said, well, I'm not aware of that pile. I said, well, the city's aware because you've had 23 calls to 311 in a year and a half to come clean up this pile, and it's only gotten worse. And he said, well, we're going to deal with it. I promise you, we're going to deal with it. And I said, this is a public health emergency right now, right today. What are you going to do about it today? And the mayor paused, and he said, we're going to go out there and clean it up. And they did. Within an hour of my phone call, the mayor had the Department of Sanitation out there, 15 workers who worked into the night, and they cleaned up 12 tons of trash, which they should have done a year and a half earlier. And by the way, this trash had, I think, been illegally dumped. A lot of homeless are living around there. They probably brought some of it in. I think people feel like they can dump garbage around downtown LA and Skid Row because it's just one giant mess from all the encampments now, and it's just a shame.
Just one brief question.
Sure.
So it's something that should have been done, like you said, but there was also something they could have done within an hour. So what's the excuse for not doing so for over the years?
You know what? I haven't gotten a good excuse. I was actually on the phone with the mayor's press secretary yesterday, and he said, I didn't really like the way your story came out. You know, because a lot of the garbage was actually in a burned out building. Although if you stood on the public sidewalk, it was so burned out, you saw right in. You saw the 12 tons of garbage. He goes, you know, that was a difficult situation because a lot of the garbage was in a private burned out building. I said, couldn't have been that hard to clean it up because you were cleaning it up within an hour of my phone call. So what's the reason you couldn't have done that months earlier? And there was no excuse given to me. The reason I talk about this story is I have seen over and over and over again two things. A city being reactive, not proactive, to dealing with homelessness and all the issues that come with it. And also, until just recently, the mayor has been saying, I have a 10-year plan. I have a 10-year plan to build enough housing, a 10-year plan. And my question is, when I drive around downtown or the valley, but especially Skid Row, and I see people collapsed in the gutter holding needles in their hand, we don't have 10 years to deal with this. Right. The other thing, you know, as I do my work, I'm trying to ask a lot of questions, and a lot of what comes out of my mouth is politically incorrect. But I feel like in this city, in this county, we need to start exchanging ideas and figuring out different ways to handle this. You know, I'll tell you, I was at my local farmer's market a couple months ago, and I had a very prominent former LA city councilman, he retired, come up to me and start talking to me about the homelessness crisis, and he said, you know, I'll tell you what we should do. He said the city has access to lots of land. We should designate pieces of land, give people living on the streets a way to get there, give them facilities like showers and toilets, but get them off the streets. And I said to him, gee, why didn't you ever bring that up when you were in the city council? I think it's a politically incorrect idea to a lot of people. But I think we have to start talking, not attacking each other for throwing ideas out. And that's it. The one other thing, well, I have more than one other thing, but you'll give me the wrap, Jake. I could go on all day. Yeah. The other thing that I think I'm seeing is, again, when we hear from our mayor and our politicians, they mainly talk about this as a housing issue, a housing crisis. With all due respect to those of you that are trying to provide housing, there's clearly a need for that. But from what I see on the streets, this is not just a crisis, a lack of affordable housing. Maybe a majority of the people that we see living on sidewalks have mental health and or drug issues. And I cannot tell you how many people I talk to living in tents and on the sidewalk where I say, if there was a spot in a shelter nearby, would you go live there? And they say, absolutely not. That's like being in a prison. I have a drug problem. I have mental illness. I don't want to go live in some place where there's a bunch of rules. And I interviewed, I don't know if you folks remember the story they just showed a few minutes ago. I interviewed a young guy living at a homeless encampment in West LA. And I said, and he told me, I'm here by choice. And he told me about his horrible life that he felt led him to live on the streets. But he said to me, every person living in that encampment is running away from something. It's usually drugs or mental illness or a life of abuse or sexual abuse. He said, but they're all here because they're running away from something. And I said, you live here, you've lived here for months and you know everyone there. How many are using drugs? And he said, everyone there is using drugs. We all have to medicate ourselves because the pain of our life is so bad. It's a complex issue. So I think when the politicians say we just need to build more housing, there's a whole other layer of this homelessness crisis that isn't being talked about enough, and that's drug addiction and mental health, and what to do about people that, I'll be interested to hear your thoughts about this. I hate to say this, some of them might be so far gone, I don't know what we can do. Others are resisting help, and others tell me there's not enough help for serious drug addiction and mental health. So I just think that needs to be a very big part of the conversation.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, one of the kind of nonprofit person, the director, he was kind of telling me an interesting thought, sharing interesting thought about like different categories of homeless persons. Like, we typically imagine like, somebody who became homeless for economic reasons. That's definitely one of the biggest categories of homeless persons. And some they wanna somehow, for whatever reasons, they became homeless and they want to get off the street, but they just could not get off the street. So it's like have not and could not. And the third category, according to what he said, was will not. Like, even if there are like helps or being provided, for whatever reasons, they are not really doing it. And the main reasons, according to what he said, is they don't want to be kind of sober in a way. Like, the shelters, especially providing helps, they many times have the sobriety rule. So you don't do the drug, you don't drink, and you really try hard with us. Only then we can really work this out. But some group did not really like it, according to his experience. So I mean, that I think connects to what Mr. Gruber just said at the end of his statements. So that is according to other groups, like they usually say like this. You don't want to criminalize homeless persons. Like you kind of try to enforce whatever law like about street like order and cleanliness, hygiene issues, and where does he go or she go, right? You are criminalizing somebody being poor for being poor. So that, to a certain extent, that makes sense, but that does not really address this another issue that we just discussed. So we got to put these thoughts together and really discuss that together, and then come up with a kind of better approach, because whatever we are doing now is not working anyways. That's obvious, isn't it? So yeah, with that, another person who's going to talk about what's going on the street will be Miss Jackson. She has been working with kind of counting homeless persons on the street. So how did it work?
Hi everyone, my name is Kristen Jackson. I'm a community activist. I'm a native-born Angelino, so I was born in Inglewood, born and raised in Los Angeles, and over the years I've seen my city and change drastically. And I work at the Los Angeles County Metro Transportation Agency. So pretty much our agency in transportation has a big part in the homelessness epidemic. There are many folks who seek refuge on our system. And so we're recognizing the pervasiveness of homelessness as it's pretty much a part of everyday life. You know, people commuting to work are encountering experiences with folks experiencing homelessness, and it's an epidemic at this point. So pretty much it's a very deeply layered and multifaceted paradox, as Joel mentioned, that must be addressed immediately, because the risk of displacement, of individuals being displaced, especially the mentally ill, students, elderly, and working poor, increases daily. So the results of the Greater Los Angeles Homeless Count that LAHSA, excuse me, I keep saying a lot, that LAHSA hosted, I've been a participant for the last 2 years. And so it reported a 12% increase in 1 year alone, where 59,000 individuals were deemed or suspected of experiencing homelessness. That is a crisis. And around 16% increase in the city of Los Angeles alone, about 36,000 individuals experiencing homelessness. And so that information is extremely valuable and provides a higher level broad oversight about this issue, but it doesn't lend to the nuanced aspects of those who are near experiencing homelessness. I mean, we have folks who are forced out due to eviction because of rent increases, right? In the Culver City alone, findings have discovered that around 40% of renters have been placed in precarious situation of potential forcible eviction. There are no rent control policies in Culver City alone that protect students, that protect renters from eviction. And I think that that's a huge problem. It has huge impacts upon being able to build and foster communities as well. 75 families had to leave the district of Culver City alone due to eviction. That is a problem. I mean, that has huge implications on who's able to contribute and who belongs in places, right? And so I think it aids more to the mental health issue too, because if someone can't focus and have a safe place to live, that's going to greatly affect their ability to be productive and to do anything in society, right? I think it's really heartening that our local government recognizes it's a prominent issue, but I think a more transparent coalition-based effort needs to be enacted at this point, because there are many of these cities across the board have plans, but they're working in siloed groups and eliminating the ability to expedite the process more quickly. And so pretty much I know in the approved county strategies to combat homelessness, it's multi-pronged. They laid it out where they include plans for preventing homelessness, subsidizing housing, increasing income, providing case management for individuals, and creating a coordinated system for housing, and increasing the amount of housing units available. However, I find that most of the support agencies are overburdened and constantly understaffed, and don't really have enough resources to provide for this mass proportion of folks who need help. And so I'm thankful for Jake and for other groups that are finding the need to bring the pressure to our politicians to address this issue right away.
Yes, I mean, sorry for this like little kind of commotion to get the microphone back and forth. So yeah, so I mean, because we started talking about that issue, the substance abuse issue, or like could not or will not. Why don't we hear from Mr. Likens about like substance abuse issue and what he thinks about that specific topic. I mean, I was going to talk about like the substance abuse issue at the end after talking about the housing, because flow of the conversation was going to be like, we built the housing and now are we assuming everybody will go in, or is that really going to happen? Or if not necessarily, why not? Like that was going to be the flow. So let's not mess up with that flow. But because Mr. Gruber started talking about that specific topic, maybe we want to hear from you a little bit about that.
I probably don't need this. I have a very loud voice. But as Jake said earlier, I've spent my life and my career in the addiction treatment and behavioral health segment. I've had over 20 years of addiction treatment experience and mental health experience. I've been CEO of 3 organizations. 2 of them were nonprofit organizations that dealt almost or entirely with the indigent or the homeless populations. One of those organizations that I helmed at the time, we were able to fund, develop, build, and run a large permanent supportive housing. So I am familiar with this issues from various perspectives. Now, obviously, one of the things that everybody keeps talking about is that things seem to get done in a silo. And one of the reasons is because people have their own bend or the things that they think are really at the core of the homeless problem. And so some people believe it's housing, and some people believe it's mental health, and some people believe it's addiction. And I believe it's all of those things. And I believe that it's not until we realize that we have to look at this from a really, really comprehensive perspective are we really going to deal with this problem. As Joel said earlier, the majority of people that are out there homeless, the statistics say that about 50% of people that are homeless have a drug addiction problem, and about 50% of homeless people have a mental health issue, and about 25% have a serious mental health issue, or what we would consider, virtually a debilitating mental health issue. And so if you look at those statistics alone, and honestly, I believe they're probably more dramatic than the statistics actually claim they are. But if you look at those numbers alone, you can see that the majority of people out there on the streets have serious mental health issues, addiction issues, or both. And so the idea that homelessness is just about housing somebody really doesn't get at the core of the problem. Because if we look at it from that perspective, much of the core of the problem is more about addiction, chronic mental health issues, and that sort of thing, and not just about a lack of housing. I went with Jake and Sharon to a beautiful permanent supportive housing village here in Los Angeles and Hollywood recently. And one of the questions that Sharon asked, Jake's wife, was about the problem with addiction. And a very, very kind, well-meaning woman who had dedicated her life's work to dealing with the homeless said, well, what we've found is when you give somebody a home and you give them hope and something to glom onto, the addiction just seems to go away. That the addiction is more about the hopelessness, or the addiction's more about just the the homelessness. It's in essence, it's a byproduct of the things that are going on in their environment. The problem with that is it's not true. If you are looking at, I understand where she's coming from, but the reality is there's, addiction is based in genetics, and addiction is based in organic brain issues. An addict, the drugs and alcohol change that person's brain. And unless you deal with the true core of the issues relating to the addiction itself, you're not really going to deal with the addiction. And so, when I helmed an organization that decided that we were going to build a permanent supportive housing so that we could treat addicts and alcoholics that were also homeless, we found ourselves up against many barriers along the process. One of them was we were being told that we couldn't require our clients we couldn't force abstinence. So, we thought to ourselves, well, this is going to be an issue. We're building this facility on the grounds of a treatment center. We can't have people bringing alcohol and drugs in. And so it took a lot of work and a lot of dedication on our part to get a waiver from the county to allow us to actually have rules in at our facility that would say that we wouldn't allow for addiction. Another barrier example that we came up against was we would get these clients in first to residential treatment. So that was the goal. We would get them into residential treatment, and then we would transition them to the permanent supportive housing. Well, the problem is once they've been in a stable living environment for a while, they're no longer considered homeless. So what we came up against was we would have to shorten the period of treatment for these individuals so that they would meet the qualifications to go into the permanent supportive housing facility, which seems crazy to me. So the individuals that were chronically homeless because of their addiction were given less treatment than the other individuals that we were treating because they had to be considered homeless still when we transitioned to permanent supportive housing. So when we talk about all of these things, all these barriers that we come up against, it's because we think of it from one perspective. Yes, we need cold weather shelters that have amnesty lockers so that people feel comfortable to show up at these shelters and not feel like their stuff's going to be rummaged through and not feel like they're going to be arrested because they have drugs in their possession. Absolutely. But we also need a system in place that allows for these people to get treatment, it allows for these people to get the mental health services they need without putting barriers for them to also receive homeless services. And the last thing I'll say is the biggest barrier when it comes to addiction treatment and mental health services is we just don't have the resources to treat these people. We don't have the beds, we don't have the treatment centers, we don't have the funding. Coming from somebody who ran nonprofit treatment centers for 15 years, I know for a fact that the biggest barrier we have to these people getting well is not enough money to fund it and not enough beds to put these people. I spent most of the years of my career watching people spend 4 weeks, 6 weeks, 8 weeks, sometimes 3 or 4 months calling in every other day to try to get a bed. Now you tell me, how realistic do you think it is to get a homeless person to get on a phone and continue calling month after month to try to get one of these treatment centers? The reality is the window of opportunity is so small that if you don't take advantage of it immediately, it disappears like that in an instant. So we need to have accessibility to these resources immediately, so when people express a willingness to take advantage of these mental health services and take advantage of these addiction services, we've got the space to treat them, and then a comprehensive way to transition them into housing so that they can then continue to trudge this road of recovery from their whatever their disease is. And if we do this right, what it does is it becomes a very cost-effective way to end homelessness, because if people stay sober, guess what they become? They become working, tax-paying citizens. If people can take care of the mental health issues and become, can get the therapy that they need, can get the medication they need, the stability that they need, then they become working, tax-paying citizens that are able to take care of themselves. And it, becomes a cycle of defeating homelessness and not just housing people permanently on a long-term basis.
Okay, thank you. Yeah. Okay.
I just want to ask you a question. Do you think, what do you do with the homeless people on the street who have severe drug addiction and don't want help? What do you do with those people? I'm not trying to put you on the spot. I'm wondering if you have any thoughts about it, because I don't.
So do you want the answer that will be politically correct or not? Just kidding.
I don't know what the answer is to that. Some states have tried really interesting stuff, and I don't know whether I agree with it or not. Florida put together a law where if you have a number of people that will come in and sign a declaration with the courts, they can actually require people to mandate them into treatment for short-term treatment. The problem with that is that probably wouldn't work for the homeless population because it requires somebody that's close to the individual. So, i.e. a parent or a family member and that sort of thing. And with the homeless population, we just don't have that, And we obviously don't want to get into the game of having police officers or other people determine whether these people are chronically addicted. I don't know if there is an answer. I think that a lot of times you have somebody that's chronically addicted to drugs. And as I said earlier, that window of opportunity is just like that. It's fleeting. And there might become a day where one day they think, this is just too overwhelming, this is just too much, I can't live this life anymore. and it might just be instantaneous because the next day they might be willing once again to do this. And so it's about the accessibility of services, I think. If we have the ability for somebody to seek services, to just call up on a phone and say, I need help, and be able to be placed somewhere where they can get that help and stuff. I mean, I don't think that we can force people into treatment. I don't think that we can put them in homeless shelters that can, force abstinence onto them. But I think it's just it comes down to accessibility and making sure that people know that if there ever becomes a time when you are willing to do this, we can get you into some place and we can help you immediately.
Okay. So I know it's a little hassle to just wait for the microphone, but for audio purpose, like audio recording purpose, try to use microphone, please. About that point, there's a fundamental, I think, two different views. So do we want to, in a way, help homeless persons, or are we ending up just promoting homeless persons? Mr. Gruber said, somebody would not really want to get help. He or she may want to just stay on street, just stay away this way, whatever that is. Or when we say we want to help, what does that really mean? Having somebody just permanently rely on just helps, and so that he cannot really independently live their lives. Or we help them to become independent and kind of live a life as a person, just like on her own or on his own, not just having to rely on help for the rest of their lives. So there's a fundamental kind of question that is being asked, and we said a few minutes ago, sometimes it's a matter of like a political correctness or not, and that makes people not really discuss about it. But it's reality is we have these two different views and having debates in a way under the surface. That makes it even harder for us to really discuss it. So in a way, I would hope just put that above the surface and really face it and really discuss it, and then really deal with it and then really solve that issue, right? So, and another thing is, I was visiting El Puente emergency homeless shelter 2-3 months ago, and so they are not having a sobriety rule. So for that reason, because once you have the rule, the homeless persons having drug issue or mental issues or alcohol issues, they are not gonna be willing to go in, and so they left it. They removed that requirement. So I see why. But the thing is, when they are kind of recruiting the residents for serving them in the shelter, they are not really looking for serious, the persons having serious mental issues or serious drug, substance abuse issue, because they need to keep this shelter kind of in order in a way. So it's more like in a way moderates, who are still using substances, who are still drinking, but they can kind of behave in orderly manner. So, and that's how it is working in reality. And another thing is there was a little lockers for homeless residents in the shelter. They were using it to kind of store these drugs and substances, and so that was kind of ironic. And then I'm talking about this because that will be connecting to the next topic about permanent housing. Because when we discuss about this emergency shelter, they call it bridge home because it will be a bridge. So they are, according to what city said a lot of time last year, it was supposed to be 3 to 6 months or maximum 9 months for them to stay and move on to the next housing, like really permanent housing. And then I asked that question to the person who was operating the shelter, and then, so how many were moved on, have moved on? So they opened it in September last year, and I was visiting in April. That's about more than half a year anyways, right? Almost 8-9 months. And then how many persons moved on through this shelter? And answer was, I think 5-6. So the speed of relocating or providing the housing was very slow. So it may be not really bridge. It may be really like for them to just stay, I don't know, until really they get the housing units available. But she was saying there are not many units that is really available anyways yet. And so, yeah, with that, let me ask to, I think, whoever wants, maybe Christian, Ahumada. So can you tell us about the status of like how many we have or how many we still need about the permanent housing?
Oof, that's a loaded question. I mean, per the latest LASA homeless count, we need approximately 60,000 homeless units to be created in the county. That number, we know that it's probably shortchanged. We know that that number is probably larger than that because the homeless count doesn't take absolutely everybody into account. And we also know that that's just a smaller portion of a much bigger housing crisis. I can tell you this. I received a letter yesterday from a group called Abundant LA. That's basically involved right now in a potential lawsuit with SCAG, which is the Southern California Association of Governments, regarding various cities that are trying to meet their housing element and their general plans. And the number of units, this is overall units that we need, and I think this is part of a larger subject, is 2.7 million units for all of Southern California to take care of all the housing needs. And that's part of the issue that we have to discuss as a city, because everybody's fighting for the same available units. So I hope that answered the question in a way probably much bigger than you were hoping I was going to answer, but that would be my opinion on the matter.
So if you turn to this one-page material that was handed out, I made it based on what I saw from like news articles and government data, and there's a thing called Measure HHH that's to build like permanent housing. According to the city, they are gonna spend $1.2 billion and to build 10,000 units. So it's a matter of simple math, so 1.2 billion divided by 10,000, that's $120,000 per unit, right? But they are in reality spending over $500,000, right? So if we divide 1.2 billion by $500,000, that will be only giving us 2,400 units, not even a quarter of 10,000 target. So, so question becomes like, what the hell, right? and another thing is, a lot of questions I heard from I think, like people, like once we discuss about $500,000 per, just for building a unit, how big is that? Like, that's about like 400 square feet, like 360 typically. And okay, why so expensive? That's one question. And the second question is, you know what? I've been working so hard, just on my own, like trying to kind of support my own life and my family. I cannot buy that house. Like, I don't have that $500,000. And why am I working, by the way? Like, maybe I should become a homeless to get that free housing. That's another kind of questions that are really existing. Like, if you see, like, news articles about homelessness, and if you see the comments below that, like, that's another question we should really answer too. Like, I mean, we want to help, and then, yeah. But what I'm saying is, generally speaking, first of all, if we can reduce down the cost, like a lot less than $500,000, it will make better sense to, I think, people. So. I mean, with that, maybe I will give you back to give the microphone back to you about like why so expensive? Like, why is it $500,000? You've been Mr. Ahumada, you've been trying to kind of save the cost for constructions, right? So please share your thoughts.
Can we put up my PowerPoint presentation, because I think that would be very helpful. And sure. Let me borrow this right here. Okay. Okay, so can I go through the presentation its entirety since I'm here? Okay. So good morning. My name is Cristian Ahumada. I'm the executive director of Clifford Beer's Housing. We're basically a nonprofit housing developer exclusively dedicated to building housing for the most vulnerable, and that would be homeless individuals, single individuals, families, individuals living with mental illness, and a host of other morbidities. We are the developer, but we are not the service provider. We partner with great service providers like the People Concerned. We partner with Mental Health America, with PATH, and together we create a complete package. On the second page here of the PowerPoint presentation, I'm going to take you through a little bit of the reasons why we have a homeless crisis, and it may go a little bit deeper than what you've heard from the panelists right now. So for those of you that are aware or unaware, LA has the third most expensive rental market in the entire United States. So New York is number one, San Francisco is number two, LA is number three. And I'm sure that a lot of you know that because you either rent or you pay a mortgage, and both of which are very expensive. Second reason, we don't have enough affordable housing. Third reason, wages are insufficient to keep up with rents or mortgages. And fourth reason, we have insufficient rental assistance. So that is Section 8. This is a very, very important conversation piece when I explain to you the next slide, which is, so we have this slide here, which is this three-legged stool. And I think this speaks a little bit to what the other panelists were talking about earlier, that this is much more, as Joe was trying to say, than just a housing crisis. So in this three-legged stool, when we talk about permanent supportive housing, it is composed of three things. First, we need the money to build it, but then we also need the money for the services. The supportive services are critical because it cannot just be done by housing alone. And then the third piece is we need the rental assistance. That is the Section 8. Without those three pieces, this will not be successful. It is practically impossible to do it. So, on the next slide, you'll have this guy pushing this ball uphill. And here, we talk about the challenges that we face. So, the first is costs are too high. So if you go to the next slide here, and this is the question that Jake was asking just a second ago. So why does it cost so much, right? Why does it have to cost $500,000, by the way, for a studio unit? And that studio unit is typically 350 square feet, okay? So let me take you through it. I could probably list 30 reasons, but these are sort of the top reasons why. Number one reason is land. Land is difficult to find, expensive, and it takes us typically about a year just to take down land. So it's not like buying a house, right? You buy a house, you have a 30-day escrow. When we negotiate with a seller, so if Joe had a piece of land here, right, and he was selling it for, let's say, $4 million, and I could build maybe 30 units. I'm trying to get him the most he can, because otherwise he's going to sell it in this private market for the most that he can, and I'm trying to get time so I can bundle the money together to buy it. So I'm going to ask him for a 10-month escrow. Joe, will you give me a 10-month escrow?
No.
So now I got to, go to my next guy here who's got available land, right? And so imagine, so it takes me, I would say 20 to 30 times of being fishing out there, waiting, for the right fish. So we have a team that's just dedicated for acquisitions. And it's extremely tiring and very, very strategic. So that's number one. Number two, construction code requires parking, irrelevant of the tenant population. And that parking is typically, as you guys would see when you're driving around Los Angeles here in K-Town, very typical. You see a concrete podium, so it's a concrete deck on the first ground floor, and then you usually have 4 or 5 stories of wood construction. That's a very typical construction typology, which is really the most efficient in the private market. That concrete podium cost about $30,000 for one parking stall. So now, I'm going to share with you later on how we try to get away from that. But now you multiply that by the entire pad. And just the price of that concrete podium is about 10% of total development cost. The entire project, just 10% is dedicated to parking. Number 3, the other day I was reading this article and it was saying that for every year that it takes you to bundle together your money to build something, prices of construction materials go up by 25%. I can assure you that it's at least that, if not more. It takes us 5 to 6 years to basically do the whole thing. It takes us 1 year to buy the land because Joel didn't want to sell it to me, right? And it's going to take us another couple of years to entitle, design it, bundle the money together. It's going to take me another couple of years to build it, and it's going to take me 6 months to a year to lease it up. There's our 6 years, right? And in that whole period of time, those costs went up astronomically. Number 4, we have to adhere to wage determinations. So wage determinations are prevailing wage, Davis-Bacon, and other wages that are triggered by the monies that we use. So this could either be state requirements, federal requirements, or so forth. That typically will increase costs somewhere between 15 to 20% based on the cost of construction if we had used private money. Next, we have to design supportive service space. And that supportive service space, by the way, is typically on that ground floor because we have nowhere else to put it, which is in that concrete podium. So it ends up costing that much more. Next, the 5 to 6 years that I was telling you about that it takes us to build, that time costs money. And last but not least, and this is a very difficult one to achieve. It says here, smaller PSH projects under 40 units cost more. But guess what? We're in the infill construction portion of our city now. Now it's not so easy to find larger sites where we can accommodate larger projects. So therefore, the infill sites that we have mostly accommodate this unit count, if not less. So the issue here is that those smaller projects, when I'm negotiating a construction contract, and I think a lot of these folks will tell you, you get economies of scale when you're able to build usually 100 units or more, but you're not going to get those savings when you're doing a small job. And 40 units or less is considered small. So I'll stop here, but that is the top 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 reasons of why it costs more. So maybe I'll stop here in the event that you have other questions.
Just to follow up, I was looking at the city data, talking about like the kind of projects considered under measure HHH, and they are typically like 80 units, and then they say total construction cost will be like $40 million, and then that includes $7 million land value. But this is in a way private project, and then 40% measure Triple H funding goes in. That's about like $18 million. And then they are designating about 40% of the units. So that will be about 30-something units for affordable housing. And otherwise, it's private, just an apartment. And then, so why 7 million? I mean, I don't know. I mean, so that's kind of, their project was one in Koreatown, and I know generally the value of the land, but when negotiating this, it becomes even more pricey. So I was kind of surprised that how come that's $7 million land. And so can you explain about that? Or
Sure. Let me see if I have a slide here that maybe might talk. I think what you're referring to is we call this in the financing underwriting world the capital stack. So the capital stack, I like to call it the sandwich because it's basically all your money. So when most of the permanent supportive housing that has been built in Los Angeles to date has been done with a tool called the low-income housing tax credit. And that low-income housing tax credit, there's two types. There's one, this may get a little technical, I'll try to keep it painless, okay? One is called 4%, the other one's called 9%. And the easiest way to explain is the 4% gives you 35% of your money, and it's not so competitive. And the 9% gives you up to 75% of your money, and it's very competitive. I mean, very competitive. You can apply once, twice a year, not get it, and then by that time you got to switch to that 4%, and then now you're missing out on 35% because it's just insufficient credits from the state to basically deal with all our needs. And this is just permanent supportive housing. This is not the rest of, you know, the affordability crisis that we have that folks also compete for in these tax credit pots. So from that now, let's make believe that we secured the 9% because Joe was spearheading TCAC and, you know, he had a soft heart and he was able to sort of accommodate that allocation of tax credits. That means that now I have 25% of costs that I need to find from elsewhere. And so that Triple H money typically accounts for a component of that. It could be 10, 15%. And then if you're not within 500 feet of a freeway, you can secure the rest of the money from the county of Los Angeles. And then the rest of it is basically another team to secure smaller grants and smaller pieces of money to be able to sort of complete that package. In that same time period when we're applying for all that money, we're also applying for what we call project-based vouchers, which is the Section 8. And if we're lucky, we'll be able to get that through one or two competitive rounds that the Housing Authority has on an annual basis. And then we complete that capital package to be able now to close construction financing and begin construction of the project. I hope that answered the question in a comprehensive manner.
Giving it back to me, like how typically long time does it take? Starting like looking for the land and then really finishing the project so that residents can move in? Typically how many years is that?
Okay, so acquisitions, just the acquisition part takes about 1 year. It's going to take me at least 2 years to bundle the money together. And in that period of time when I'm bundling that complete capital stack, whatever that is, let's call it $40 million, I'm also entitling the project. So entitling the project means that, for instance, if I want to do away with that concrete podium, and let's say that I was lucky and fortunate enough to find a site that's by a transit-oriented corridor, I'm able to reduce parking requirements, build a little bit higher, build a little bit wider. And so that entitlement process happens during that same period of time. Then I can increase my densities, build more units, reduce costs, and do all the good stuff we all like. So 1 year acquisitions, 2 years entitlements, design, and piece together the money. It's going to take me at least 2 years to build it. 2 years. And then it's going to take me 6 months to 1 year to basically lease it up, and then I can close my permanent financing. So it's roughly between 5 and 6 years.
Okay. Can I say something about the capital stack? No, something that you mentioned and what this process that Christian's describing really made me think of something, and it was, you mentioned in the beginning, Albert Einstein says, you know, doing the same thing over and over again with an expectation of something different is kind of ludicrous. Einstein also said, imagination is everything. You know, it's a preview to the future things to come, right? And so Flyawayhomes, we're a volunteer organization, we're a startup, we're permanent supportive housing developers, but we really come from a nonprofit. which is the people concerned. And so I think that we took the approach that you're considering here, which is let's put down the political correctness, let's talk about solutions, and let's kind of, everybody's got their own angle and their own, personal past, but let's not think about that, and let's just focus on a solution. And so Flyawayhomes, the people concerned 10 years ago had a committee that said, look, we've got 500 or 600 people. They have mental illness. They are basically ready for housing. We just don't have the housing for them. So, look, let's get some real estate people together that don't come from, the tax credit world, that don't come from any particular set of let's unlimit the think tank here and just think about a solution. How do we get beds for these people? They get SSDI, $1,100 a month. How do we provide that housing? And so we kind of took the approach, we deconstructed the way that this supportive housing is being built. Finance is one of them that really slows them down with this whole capital stack. Let's imagine, what if we just use cash? That would make things easier, right? So let's do that. This building process of, podium and, all these inspections that slow things down. What would happen if we just use this modular construction? It's not really tried and tested for the multifamily, but let's do it. What about shared housing, right? $500,000 per unit based on HUD guidelines that require one person per unit. Okay, great. That was an ideal for the federal government to abide by, I understand. But what would happen? Imagine if 2 people were to share 1 unit. It happens in college all the time, or for that matter, 3 or 4. Wouldn't that drive the cost? And so I think what we did in as far as Flyaway or the People Concerns Permanent Supportive Housing Committee is do what we need to do right now, which is take a cost-driven approach. The agencies are going to have to deal with addiction and substance abuse and mental illness, but at the end of the day, the individuals that are dealing with these cannot deal with them without a roof over their head. I mean, it's unrealistic to believe that you can first become sober, then come to me for a house. And so it's a housing first mentality. These are the same operator that runs El Puente, the bridge home. They're have 50 years of experience running scattered site supportive housing. The answer is not only housing. So I think that that's been recognized here. It's housing with supportive services for the chronically homeless that really benefit from them. And so I think that that's when we talk about the need for housing. I'm not discounting the need for housing. I think that there are affordable workforce housing, hundreds of thousands, 1.7 million in Southern California, a shortage of affordable housing. What Flyaway and our committee did was focus on the percentage that are chronically homeless, mentally ill, on the streets, the ones that Mr. Grover sees on a daily basis. And so I think that that's sort of the approach that we took. That's why what our program, it's similar, it's an operational subsidy-based supportive housing delivery model. So that I think is important though. The capital stack is crazy. I don't know how you do it.
Right. So, I use this analogy, like, let's say we have a house and there's a leakage issue, so water comes in and we need to take out the waters. But at the same time, what people would do very first would be stopping the leak first, right? And only then you can really meaningfully take out the waters out and then resolve the issues. Give me 1 second. Yeah. So that. But the thing is, I think stopping the water leakage, that's, I think, affordable housing. I think everybody saw in the Economic Roundtable report that was covered by LA Times. They are saying in LA County, we have 1 million low-income persons, and we have 500,000 extremely low-income persons that are on the verge of becoming homeless tomorrow. So, and the report says, indeed, many persons are becoming homeless, temporarily here and there, and also trying to go back off the street, but again, they become homeless, and at the end of the day, they end up being just homeless, permanently. So, for that, let's build 500,000 units to help these extremely low-income persons, but that'll take forever with this current traditional model. And so, which was why I think maybe, we were more talking about, helping homeless persons on street first. And then that takes forever. the city had this major Triple H plan to build 10,000 units, and that does not really make cost sense at all, and it takes forever. And they just barely started building it. So, and then, going back to this chart, so I'm just trying to show you the big picture of what's going to be discussed now. So, we just looked at the plan, right, of 1.2 billion, 10,000 units. That is supposed to be costing 120,000, but they are in fact spending $500,000, so that they are building only, in reality, maybe 2,400 units. And county has $3.5 billion. Their target is housing 45,000 persons. That is supposed to be $77,000 per unit or per bed, and that's not, really true in reality. So this plan as is not really working out at all. And it takes, like he said, like about 5 years and like multiple years anyways. So, and yeah, so that's the reality. And then the one alternative suggestion we are kind of considering now is about modular model. And we want to kind of hear from them and see how that worked or how it's going to work and whether that's going to really work. According to what I heard, it's about $130,000 for building it per unit, and then it takes maybe 10 months, when things go in just smoothly. I think that would be typically. And then we can, with the same money, 1.2 billion, we can build, I think, about almost 10,000 units. With the same county money, 3.5 billion, we can build about 27,000 units. So that's over, like, that's close to pretty much like 40,000 units. That may be kind of a lot or good enough to cover or housing, for housing like 58,000 homeless persons on the street, because some don't necessarily need permanent housing. So we could kind of help them with the other programs. So whoever that may really need permanent housing may be covered by that 40,000 units. So, I mean, we can think a lot, we can think about a lot of better plans if this model works out. And like based on, again, this like economic roundtable report, we need 500,000 persons needing like affordable housing. And then let's say we are trying to build like 500,000 like beds. It could be one unit, one person unit. It could be multiple person unit. So, if even still with this modular model, we will need $65 billion to build like 500,000 units. So that's the reality. And but try to imagine, like, when we spend $500,000 per unit, to build 500,000 units for $500,000, that's like we cannot even. I mean, that's like number that's not really going to happen in reality at all. So that's the kind of generally the big kind of picture / issues we are looking at. And with that, did you want to say something, right?
Yeah. What I was going to say is before we shift a little bit from cost savings. So the models that we've been looking at to basically reduce costs and give you a little bit of glimmer of hope. So it's not all doom and gloom, right? So if you take a look at this page right here that has a little pie chart on the right-hand side, on the right-hand bottom corner. So if you take a look at that, you'll see that if we're at 500,000 for one studio unit, and now let's make believe that I go after a city disposition. Or let's make believe that that particular piece of land is sitting in an opportunity zone and we're able to entice a socially minded investor to come in and purchase that land that gives them capital gains benefits. We can remove the cost of land and potentially shift it into the cash flow of the project. So now we take out the cost of land, number one, and let's make believe that we're able to site by a transit-oriented corridor that now I can pretty much reduce parking or do it to a minimal and reduce the concrete podium. So now I have 2. And let's make believe that now I shift, and this will be the transition, I think, to the next panelist. We're able to shift to a faster typology like prefab construction, shipping containers, or something that's quicker, that's faster, leaner, meaner. Those 3 things alone, which are very simple, can get us a 25% reduction right off the bat. So now we're not at 500,000 per unit, we are 375,000 per unit. That makes the money go farther. So there's other cost-saving approaches, but those are the 3 biggies, and I wanted to share that with you. So like I said, there's hope out there. We just need to be able to work together to arrive at that place.
So yeah, why don't I ask Mr. Beau Donohoe about the modular model. So how does it work?
Yeah, sure. So just to back up a little bit, my name is Beau Donohoe, and I work for the Relevant Group. We are headquartered in Hollywood and traditionally have been luxury hotel, nightclub, and restaurant developers. Tao, Dream Hotel Hollywood, those are some of the projects we've built. So why is a luxury hotel developer sitting up here talking about permanent supportive housing? So we wanted to build a large project, hotels and condos, downtown LA, right by Staples Center, South Park, all the big high-rises that you see. And we found this piece of land that was improved with a 100-year-old structure that had been vacant for 20 years, but it was formerly a single-room occupancy hotel, which is essentially your last stop before becoming truly homeless. It's a $40 rent by the week, you share a bathroom, you share a common area, you have a 100-square-foot room to sleep in. With those covenants in place, if we wanted to redevelop the project into a high-rise 400-room hotel room and 150 condos, we had to replace them off-site within a certain amount of time, within a certain radius of the original property. And so we had 2 options: do it ourselves, or write a check to a group like Clifford Beers Housing to provide a grant or a loan for them to fill out the capital stack. And so we're looking at the process, and my background had been in traditional multifamily and low-income housing tax credit development, and it takes 5 to 6 years to build, and it's $500,000 per unit on average. And these guys on the hotel side are looking at it and saying, we can build a luxury hotel for $400,000 a unit, and when you really look at it, it's the same thing. It's about a 350 square foot room, but you have the amenities and the finishes of a luxury hotel: rooftop pool, lobby, bar, restaurant. How does affordable housing cost more than a luxury hotel? And it's all of the things that we've been talking about. It's the land cost, it's the entitlement, timeline, it's the time that it takes to get from identifying a piece of land to 6 years later when you can deliver a finished product. And so as we were getting into this, analysis of how are we going to provide these units off-site so we can develop our hotel and our condos, it was the perfect confluence of events. The city had just started recognizing that this was a humanitarian crisis, and the state was dedicating attention to the entitlement issues that developers were having getting projects to go forward. So with the Transit-Oriented Community Ordinance and Senate Bill 35 that was passed by the state a few years ago, and the Proposition HHH money, which provided $1.2 billion to fund affordable permanent supportive housing, it created this opportunity where we could build it cheaper and we can build it faster. For instance, with the Senate Bill 35, if you have a 50% of your project devoted to affordable housing, you get to bypass CEQA, the California Environmental Quality Act. By far the biggest hurdle to developers in the state of California, which can add years to your development timeline. Gone. You go to the city and say, here's my project that has 50% minimum affordable units. They are legally mandated by the state to issue you building permits within, or approvals within 90 days for a project 150 units or less, or 180 days for projects 151 units or greater. So we're looking at this, and with all of these development incentives, with TOC getting the density, reducing our parking requirements, with the Senate Bill 35 being able to expedite our development timeline, and all of the money that the city is dedicating towards the construction of permanent supportive housing, we realized there was an opportunity for us to make a change. And then the big question becomes construction costs. How do we bring our construction costs down? We have prevailing wage if we're going to utilize public funding sources. You have construction costs going up 25% at least per year or more. And so our organization has a long history of working in China. We have raised $300 million plus of EB5 capital to finance the construction of our hotels. And the EB5 program basically says if you, as a foreign individual, invest $500,000 or more into a project that creates American jobs, we will give you a green card. And so with a long history of working in China, we were able to identify a manufacturer of modular homes that is a subset of the world's largest manufacturer of shipping containers in the world. Every shipping container that you see out there, they produce 1 out of every 2. And so with that technology and with that scale, we were able to forge a relationship to bring in prefabricated modular homes at a fraction of the cost and at a fraction of the time that if you were even to do the same thing in the US, it wouldn't make as much economic sense. For instance, most of the manufactured modular homes that are based here in the United States utilize wood frame construction. So you're capped out at about 5 stories. With our model, steel-based modular homes, we can increase the density and we can take that up to 7 or 8 stories. So we can put more units on that same piece of land, bringing down that per unit cost. Also, with the US-based manufacturers, they don't have the capacity to fill the demand of modular housing developers. Everyone wants to do it. They're looking at it. They're saying, this is how we bring our costs down. So you go to a group here in the US and you say, I want 150 units for my project in Koreatown, affordable housing. We're going to help people. We're going to help the community. Okay, get in line. You'll get them in 2 years. Adding to the timeline. Working with the world's largest manufacturer of shipping containers, and even though they're not repurposed shipping containers, they utilize the same technology to manufacture that steel chassis that is the basis of the modular home. It's basically the same thing. And so with the scale that they have, we can do as many projects or put as many units on the ground as we want, as fast as we can basically entitle them and finance them. And so through all of those factors, we're able to, at a, call it 350 square foot studio 1-bedroom unit, build, ship, and deliver those modular units, which are fully furnished, TVs hanging on the wall, the bed's made, the kitchen's there, for $65,000 a unit, just to get them to the site. With another $65,000 per unit, we can, just like Jake said earlier, assemble them like Legos. There was a project here in Los Angeles that utilized modular construction, and in 11 days, they stacked 77 units. Do you know how long it would take to put 77 units down wood frame? Months. So through all of those measures, we are able to bring that construction cost down, and through that, with the funding sources available, we are still dependent on the operating subsidies, which is probably our biggest challenge right now. But on the capital side, the capital stack that Cristian was talking about, we are not as reliant on what they call soft money or grants from organizations that are, looking to develop more affordable housing. We can really finance these projects with 4% tax credits and tax-exempt bonds. So if we can get an operating subsidy, we are able to fill our capital stack out, and with the 4% credits, they basically, unlike 9%, have a window to apply for with the state every other month. So we're not as constrained by the 9% tax credit timeline, which will give you, approximately 75% of your construction costs and funding. We can utilize 4% tax credits, get about 35% of our project finance with those, and utilize tax-exempt bonds for the rest and not need any other funding sources. Triple H is great, and it's helping a lot of groups kind of fill the holes in the capital stack, and we did apply for some of that money. but we're not reliant upon it or upon other public funding sources to capitalize these projects. And that's really due to all of these factors that are, working in play right now with the development incentives, with the financing incentives like Triple H, and like Cristian mentioned, with the opportunity zones, where we don't need to wait 12 months to acquire a piece of land. We can close on a piece of land all cash after doing customary due diligence, environmental studies and whatnot, and making sure that we can build the project that we intend to build there. We can bring the construction cost down to about $250,000 per unit, all in, inclusive of land, construction, soft costs, and financing cost, which is roughly half of the average in the city right now. So we're really excited about it, and we think that this modular technology can really help other developers bring the cost down, because typically, if you're going to build a wood frame project, you go into your site, you grade it, you pour your concrete podium, and then you build one story at a time. With the modular process, while your units are being manufactured, ours in China, you can do all of your site work and you can pour your podium, so that by the time that you're finished with all of that, all of your units are here on US soil ready to be stacked. And the time that you can assemble them is much less than traditional construction. So if a project normally takes about 2 years to get done, from breaking ground to receiving your certificate of occupancy, we anticipate 10 to 14 months based on a few factors, but call it a year on average. So bringing the timeline down by 50%, bringing the cost down by 50%. That's what we're doing, and that's what we're really excited about, and want to share that with other groups here, because the modular construction technology based out of China, it's not exclusive to us. We're looking to bring that to other developers here in the city of Los Angeles so that they can also start making an impact in the communities and utilize the development incentives and utilize the financing incentives, and then utilize the modular construction technology to bring the cost down and help more people and put more homeless individuals in housing, providing them with services, helping them rehabilitate their lives, because Kevin was right. You can't expect to really help somebody if they're still on the streets battling day in, day out, without a roof over their head, without the supportive services at the community, with a dedicated case manager connecting them with financial benefits that they're entitled to, medical benefits that they should be seeking, drug addiction, mental health counseling. You need the housing to do that, to really effectively apply the services so that they can rehabilitate themselves.
So that 10 to 14 months of building the housing, of using this modular technology, that is from the time of having land secured first, right?
So we anticipate from identifying a piece of land through certificate of occupancy, 2 years.
2 years. Okay.
From breaking ground on the land that we own through the end of construction would be about 1 year. So we identify a piece of land, we close on it, we spend a year entitling it, raising the capital needed to finance it, and then the second year will be all construction.
Right. And now I'm going to ask 2 questions to Mr. Kevin Hirai. Number one, according to my understanding, Flyawayhomes tried different models, including container and modular models. So, and I know you did a couple of projects already. So how did that work? That's question number one. And question number 2 would be the land. Like when we talk about like 500,000 the affordable housing units, where are we going to build all this? That's another big question to be answered. And then I'm sure you did some investigation/studies about it. So what?
Well, I think it's
any suggestion?
I'll share with you the timeline, right? We're talking kind of broad terms. So Colden, where we built it, was one of my clients. I'm a property manager, and it was a duplex on a 10,000-foot lot. We closed escrow end of May 2017. We got our permits in 2 months, because remember, all we're building is a foundation. We had our foundation done August 2017. Then at the same time, we were supposed to have our modules delivered August 2017. There was a delay because they had issues on the modular manufacturer side. We ended up getting them July next year. So it was an 11-month delay. We were open in November of last year, of 2018. So you add that all up, it's like 9 months of active construction, 11 months sitting on our hands. So I think that's sort of, as far as the timeframes go, That's just the perfect example of how you can drive the costs. Shipping containers have limitations because what's good about them is that they're standardized, 8 foot by 20, 30, 40 feet, certain height. That also gives limitations when you're talking about, we want to go from a 2-bedroom, 1-bath model to a 2-bedroom, 2-bath model. To do that, you'd have to add another shipping container, right? Whereas when you go with like a bigger purpose-built, custom, heavy-gauge steel manufacturer, you could add 8 inches and then be able to achieve the extra bathroom. When you're talking about manufacturing in China, there are only certain capabilities. You don't have the capacity to build, to manufacture these modules. Just, you have to get in line. China has a capacity, as a potential. It's a global community working on this solution, so I really think it's going to happen here. Factory OS is doing stuff with wood. You asked about land. And again, we take a holistic approach. We don't come from any particular industry. Who's best at sourcing land is basically what we asked ourselves. And so there's the president of CBRE, Southern California, Arizona, Hawaii is Lou Horn. He's very passionate about solving the homelessness crisis, and he's our partner. So CBRE is going to help us to acquire land. And it sounds kind of, what they did last year, 2018, they took 24 Gensler interns, they took 12 of their interns, and they said, let's look at all the city and county-owned lots. To Christian's point, if we could utilize government resources, land, what could we possibly do? And they literally, the interns, they came up with an algorithm to identify which of these sites are the best. And then they designed them, and they said, here's what the city could do. Well, we basically said, let's use that same algorithm, and instead of looking at individual city and county-owned lots, let's look at every single parcel in the city of LA. And then let's identify what would really work for our program based on proximity to grocery, pharmacy, transit, based on our population, services. And we wrote a custom algorithm over the past several months. We're still working on it, but it's going to basically help us to identify cold, which are the most ideal sites, and then we can go to the different council districts and discuss, hey, these are the 50 top sites in your district that would work. They're infill sites, right? As Cristian mentioned, there aren't that many 20,000 foot R3 transit-oriented sites. If there are, we would be underdeveloping them. So basically our pitch to the HHH committee is, look, the land it's difficult, but it's there. And the size of lots that we're talking about, they're half-acre lots, maximum, 12,000 to 20,000 foot lots. On a 20,000 foot lot, we could build 40 units, 80 beds, because ours are 2-bedroom, 2-bath models. 80 beds, you just extrapolate that out. It's like 50 acres across the city of LA could house what our audacious goal is to house 20,000 people by the time the Olympics get here. And that would basically eliminate the street homelessness, the visible tents. And so I think that if you take that approach in a really production, cost-driven, time, cost, speed, and quality, right? Cristian mentioned a 3-legged stool. There's a 3-legged stool of project management that says you can't get speed and cost without giving quality, right? And I think that with modular, that changes that whole equation upside down. You can achieve everything. So I think that these are the solutions that we need to fine tune. These are not done by any means, but we need to continue to talk about them. I think if we really all want to address all of the homelessness is it's complicated, but it's not. You know what I mean?
And yeah, so did city or county consider this modular model in any time, like before today?
Well, I think they have been. I just don't think that there are a lot of risks associated with it. Our modular manufacturer could have easily gone out of business, and we could have been stuck with a lot. Traditional affordable housing developers cannot take those risks, and I don't blame them. Banks won't bank it. And so it takes somebody who, friends and family, like that's who funded Colden. And by the way, we did 2 projects. One's done, one's in development. We raised $8 million privately. And these are all from individuals that just, they expect a 4 to 5% return. But really they're doing it because they believe that this could be the solution. And we need to try new things, right? What's being done right now is good. We still need to do it, but we need to think about other ways to supplement.
Sure.
And I think that that's sort of the spirit that now the politicians, the communities are really getting behind, because they realize, look guys, unless we do something differently, nothing's going to change.
Exactly, sure. So Mr. Donohoe, yeah. you want to add anything before we move on to the next topic? No? I mean, just asking. And so about the land and the parking space issue. So Kevin Hirai, he was talking about like how to find the lands. So question typically coming from just people would be like, how about using like city-owned and county-owned like or state-owned lands? So how many are like or how much are available if we try to use them?
I don't know the answer to that question, but I think you're fishing in the right place. Okay. So I think one of the things that we need to do is we need a new tool. So the way we have prefab is a new tool, we need a mapping tool. And that mapping tool needs to have many layers. So one of those layers needs to be city and county-owned property. But then it also needs to have the zoning. So if it doesn't have the right zoning, it's no good. It needs to have the transit-oriented corridors that we've been talking about, because then we can build more, less parking. But it also needs to put out opportunity zones, because how do I not know that all of you are not potential investors, right, that would be willing to put your money there? We need to include tax defaulted properties in there. We need to put out Caltrans. So it would be a multi-layered mapping tool. And then we can see where in Los Angeles it would be good. By the way, there's one more, and I think something Jake and I discussed briefly yesterday. There's several places in the city, and I would use an example. In Van Nuys, in the San Fernando Valley, there's a new transportation line that's going to be built. It's along Van Nuys Boulevard. Once that line goes up, those stations are going to be critical, because think of a station as a dot, and then you draw a circle around it. All that land is going to go up, because that all have transportations called tiers. And so tier 3, tier 4 is what's most valuable, because that allows you density, parking reductions, setbacks, concessions, etc. If we know that those stops are going to be there, let's invest in it now. And we get there before anybody else does. We dedicate it, we have the community meetings, we discuss with the various agencies, and then we can figure out, everybody here gets one project. And we bring everybody else in. So those are the sophisticated and intelligent models that we need to be investing in for the future to be able to accommodate the increase in our homeless population. So I hope that was helpful, but a mapping tool, definitely.
Sounds good. So yeah, I'm gonna, I think, open the mic to the audience, like for any comments or question. Okay. Can I go here and talk more?
Good morning. First of all, I just want to thank you. But I'm staying here just like three blind men and see the elephants, and they try to figure out what the elephant look like. That's how I feel right now. Anyway, let me introduce introduction about me a little bit, so why I'm here. First of all, I was the Southern California Korean Minister Association. I was president and serving Southern California. Also, right now I'm with the Wilshire Center Koreatown Neighbors Counselor, and as serving homeless and public relationship. And I just want to thank you for Jack's doing a great job. But at the same time, and I really need to know a lot more. However, I could relate it, because especially Joe, I could relate to him because I'm an ex-police officer. I served as a police officer for 14 years and worked the government and retired at 21 years. So I could relate what Joe's saying. But at the same time, the rest of you guys making the things that it's like I said, it's elephants for me. So I'm going to just thank you for what you guys doing. But at the same time, that I would like to give my card to you, so hopefully you can educate me, so I could educate the Wilshire Center, the Koreatown Neighbors Counselor, and we have a lot of homeless issue, and I am not in charge, but I am part of the community to solve. So hopefully that, you know, and I could get educated and I can pass on to it. So I want to thank you for Jack, so what are you guys doing? So I will give a card and help me to solve, not only solve, but and I could be assist to better for the community. And I thank you.
Okay. Any other question, comments?
Thank you, Jake. Thank you, everyone, for being here. I wanted to ask a question. My name is Jerry Sullivan. I'm with SullivanSaysSoCal.com. There's a proposed homeless shelter on Paloma Street downtown. The city's going to lease this space, turn it into a homeless shelter. They agreed to lease it 35,000 square feet at $1 a square foot per month. It's $35,000 a month. It was brought to their attention through my coverage that they were only getting about half that, 17,000 square feet. So they did a new lease and a new market study. The first market study said, we went and checked and it justifies about $1 a square foot. Then this information came to light. They did a new lease. They agreed to still pay 35,000 square feet for half the space. And then did a new market study 4 months later that said $2 a square foot is justified. Okay. This looks very much like corruption. And what I'd like each of you to consider or answer is, have you encountered any corruption in this process? And are we leaking money out of this system? And what is going on? And are the dollars that are supposed to get to where they're most effective, are they getting there? And has anybody encountered that? Because to me, everything else is for naught if the money's just going to leak away. So if any of you have any experience you could shed light on, I'd be interested. Thank you.
Anybody would answer?
Yeah, I can say I haven't seen corruption, and I can say that actually the opposite is true. I think that there's so much regulation and there's so much oversight that people are afraid, right? And so I think that that actually drives cost, believe it or not. And so, I mean, definitely, as far as, you know, we're competing for money in these different, that's available for the public. They're running these competitions very, very close to the vest and properly. So I don't see that at all. I just think though that can kind of slow things down. You know what I mean? People are scared to do things that are maybe innovative but maybe seen as risky, right?
Yeah, I was going to say exactly the same thing. We are very definitely under the microscope at the end of every particular project. There's something called a cost certification that itemizes every line item. So I know nothing about that. Yeah, I maybe Joe can. Yeah, no, I know nothing about that. I was going to say something earlier that Kristen had said, which is that the city departments and the county departments are overworked, you know, and we also need to make sure that as we double, triple, quadruple productions, that those staffs are also doubling and increasing and getting, you know, the amount of folks that they need in order to sort of keep up with this incredible demand that we have. I know it's a separate thing, but I just wanted to say that because it's all part of it. So.
So I know you said that one of the biggest contributions to homelessness is like drug abuse and like addiction, and I'm wondering what you're doing to prevent that from happening in the first place, rather than just dealing with the homelessness that's like going on. Like, what are you doing to prevent more homeless people from like becoming homeless?
David, do you want to answer that? So yeah, I think I think we are going to have a second panel discussion and third one probably, and I think that we are going to okay.
That's a good question, and I think there's a lot of people that will have a lot of different solutions, but what can you really do? I think that, in addition to us developing permanent supportive housing, we are looking to develop affordable workforce housing. And with the rising rents and the rising construction costs, here in Los Angeles and you don't have the incomes rising at the same rate, a lot of people are priced out of housing, which can lead to homelessness that may not be linked to drug or mental health issues. So I think, at least in our perspective, what we're trying to do is develop affordable housing and utilizing these development incentives to develop more of it so that we can provide an alternative solution to just going and finding, an apartment in Koreatown that may be more than someone can truly afford. The federal government, 30% of your income or more is deemed unaffordable if you spend it towards your housing. So if we can provide government regulated affordable housing where you are not spending half of your paycheck just to live, we think that that can help people not fall into homelessness by giving them safe, stable, affordable housing where they're not worried about, is my landlord going to increase my rent 200% because I live in Inglewood right next to this big stadium that's going up and people are willing to pay 3 times what I am paying now, and I get kicked out on the streets and I can't find an affordable solution for housing. So we think that that's part of it.
I just wanted to say, if I were in that situation and I found myself homeless behind a dumpster somewhere, I would probably want to take drugs myself, and I would probably want to drink, right, just to make the pain go away. So I think that there are, definitely drugs and addiction can cause homelessness, but I think also it's a cause and effect thing. I think a lot of times people become addicted to drugs because they're in a really crappy situation. You know what I mean? And they want to try to cut that edge down a little bit, and then they become addicted, and then that's another compounding factor to their homelessness.
Yeah, I think both are happening in reality. Yeah. So the question and what you just said, both are kind of in the same line with what Economic Roundtable was suggesting, like the homeless persons like that who just became homeless. Helping him, getting him off the street will be a lot cheaper and faster. So that will be a lot more cost-efficient way of doing it. But city or county does not really have that program. They are kind of struggling with more, like, let's say, somebody who just became a homeless person and then call and then ask for help, and they will be like, how long were you on the street?
It's reactive.
Just now, and then they wait for a couple of years. So that's the reality. So that's very unfortunate, and then that makes it this helping system very slow and not really working out. So that person should wait on the street maybe a couple of years, and then he should be mentally ill or having substance abuse issue, and they become very serious homeless person. Only then they can really get help, because helps are not really enough in reality. So, and then we should think about the big picture. So that's in a way a good question. So Justin?
But a lot of drug addictions are caused by starting with something weaker, such as marijuana, which is legal now, and they search for cheaper and bigger highs, right? So they get addicted to more serious drugs that are easier to access. And a lot of people also, they have opioid addictions from their doctor prescribing too much medicine. And a lot of homeless people on the streets right now, I know they started like this and then they became more like that. So rather than I don't know how to explain, but that's just my idea, I guess.
Hand it over to Justin first, and then go to you.
Hello, my name is Justin Blakely. I'll consider my title as a eliminating homelessness advocate. As someone who's previously worked in this type of field with nonprofits that are looking to end homelessness and poverty within Los Angeles County alone, I've encountered so many organizations, nonprofits, developers who are looking to end this within Los Angeles County or proclaim to want to end it. How do we look at the fact that the homelessness count is continuously rising? I mean, we're about 60,000, I would say, roughly, and it's going to continuously rise, especially as our economy continues to increase when it comes to gas, rent, mortgage, all these prices. I mean, gas is $5, down the street, in some places. And so I preface it all to say that how do we not reinvent the wheel to how we're ending this cycle or this system of people who are homeless, because there's so many organizations, there's so many people that are looking to do the same thing. And so how do we eliminate those who are, you know, how do we eliminate redundancy? And how do we all come together as one to look at how we eliminate this system? And then two, being involved in a lot of this work, I see that we often talk a lot, and I see that we're always given these timelines of years and years to go. But as we continuously say that, you know, we have a development project coming up, and you know, it'll take about another 2 to 3 years to even start breaking ground. Well, in another 2 to 3 years, we might have our homeless count, and I, you know, knock on wood, I hope it doesn't, but it could be up another 15 to 20,000. You know, in Los Angeles County, that's very realistic. And so, my two questions, just you know, to bring it full circle again, is one, how do we reduce the redundancies in the work we're doing with ending homelessness just in Los Angeles County, in terms of all our organizations, all of our nonprofits, developers coming together as one to tackle the problem? And then also, how are we looking to, you know, streamline the process, get around all of these nuances and these things that are causing this timeline to be, for instance, 2 to 3 years, just for example, to even break ground on building permanent supportive housing?
I'm going to give this a crack. So everybody who's sitting here in front of you today, and I can tell you definitely for myself, we do this every day, 24 hours a day. I've been doing this since 2000, just exclusively on what we call special needs. So I'm going to use a metaphor a little bit, because I think that that's going to be the brave new world of where we're all heading and the reason why we're here. Is everybody here familiar with Iron Chef? Okay, so Iron Chef, you have a fridge, right? And you pop open the fridge and you don't have steak. You don't have fish. Maybe you have old piece of bread, one egg, piece of cheese, and maybe and we got to make something of that. So we have to innovate, which is what you're saying, right? We have to innovate with the resources that we have. This is a very new place for us as a city, for everybody, the developers, you know, the jurisdictions, because the problem now is so gigantic. So what you're saying is absolutely correct. What we're seeing is the maturation of a city. We're seeing that Los Angeles now needs to go up, right? And as we go up, we look to models potentially outside Los Angeles, outside the US, and we say, how do they do this, right? And where, you know, I'm from Chile, and I was telling my son that the school where I went to back home was 10 stories, one building, and one of those stories was where we played, you know? And when you went downstairs, you know, there were buses and taxis, and it's the built cities, you know, it's the next sort of phase of evolution. So I want to answer this by saying that as a city, we need to get comfortable with that. And we're not comfortable with that. So when we engage in conversations about citing a project, we have extreme opposition, not just because of the vulnerable populations. We have opposition because folks are afraid of density. And we need to have those conversations as a city. And we need to be able to make decisions as a city and be able to say, okay, we're going to preserve single-family neighborhoods, but the major arterials is where we're going to go up, because there we can have density and we can have buildings that don't have parking, right? And that way we preserve the interior pockets and then be able to sort of carry that conversation along. But I can assure you that everybody who's sitting here today has backlashes, you know, from being at community meetings where you get called every name on the book. So I think that that maturation is a conversation that we need to have as a city, and there's a lot there. But doing the Iron Chef, seeing what we got, having those conversations can go a long way in being able to say we can work together, So anybody else?
Hi. So I also think I thank you for taking a crack at it, but I also believe that there has to be a sacrificing of individual agendas, and there needs to be an alignment of goals to address this is immediate. So there needs to be a prong to deal with the immediacy and then deal with longer term alternatives, in my opinion, because again, I do believe that there are many plans across the city that are working in siloed groups, as I mentioned, that have their own individual plans that need to be addressed, but there needs to be a coordination effort that's standardized for now, for handling right now. So that's
to kind of piggyback on that, I agree with the theory that we need to get out of everybody's silos and we need to start working together. I think a lot of the reasons why I'm listening to what it takes to get these construction projects off the ground, and I remember when we were doing our permanent supportive housing community, there were so many barriers to getting things going and getting it built, and so many barriers that made it difficult for us to have such a community within the grounds of a drug treatment facility. And so a lot of times decisions are made from the one perspective that end up being a hindrance to helping from another perspective. And so if we can find some way to have a concerted effort to bring everybody to the table and talk about, so what are the different aspects of homelessness that we see as a problem, and how can we deal with them in a multi-pronged way, So, yeah, we want to make it so that people can access temporary housing without having a with the substance use problem that maybe aren't willing to or don't want to give up their use of drugs at the time. But we also have to have mechanisms for people that are willing to give up drugs and alcohol and do need treatment that can access services without having to worry about being in a facility where other people are using and drinking alcohol and using drugs. And so all of these things, getting all of these people to the table and having the ability for them to have comprehensive services in one location. You go to a lot of these permanent supportive housing, a lot of these homeless facilities, and yeah, they have a social worker on hand that meets with the client weekly, and yeah, they have somebody that can help them with workforce development that meets with them weekly. But if somebody has a chronic mental health issue or a chronic addiction issue, meeting with a social worker once a week isn't going to do it. And so finding a way to have more comprehensive services in one location where you can provide long-term housing, where you can provide addiction treatment, where you can provide mental health treatment that maybe involves things like ensuring med compliance. One of the biggest barriers that we have to the mentally ill homeless achieving the success that we want is just things as basic as med compliance, getting them to take their medications. Is somebody checking with them on a daily basis that they're taking their medications? And so some of these things seem really simple, but they become a really huge problem when you look at it from, a bird's eye view.
Okay. Any other question, comment? Okay.
So it's been discussed that mental health is like a big issue within the homeless community, and especially with like addiction and stuff, relapse is possible. How do you keep these people like on their feet, and once they're out of these like programs and stuff, will there be like outreach programs to see how these people are doing so that they don't fall back into the previous lifestyle that they were stuck in?
So pretty much the social services departments, they're overburdened currently, and there really just are not enough people, not enough money to support for the outreach, because as I mentioned before in the homeless count, and as Cristian mentioned, the homeless population is greatly much more, I think the quantity, the volume of people, it's a lot more than what was reported, right? Because again, the homeless count is only a visual it's only a visual count. And so if that is your main mechanism for tracking people, a visual count, that's not taking into account people who, may not be, it's not taking into account people who are experiencing homelessness in a different way, right? And so there just aren't enough people to do follow-up, and we need to pay more people, and that's another part of this approach, where there needs to be more workforce that is specifically, I'm sorry, I'm so nervous, because this is really something that's extremely passionate to me, because I work in downtown Los Angeles, and I experience this every day. There are folks who come up to me who are experiencing homelessness, right? And as an employee, a government employee at Metro, people are constantly seeking out services, right? And I do my best in my individual experiences to try to help people on a one-to-one basis by calling, the LA Hop and all of these other programs that allow for tracking and outreach. But I'm one person, and sometimes the outreach workers, they go out to the system, and they're on our state rail stations multiple times to outreach to individuals, but they don't have a main frame of reference if folks are without homelessness, because the nature of homelessness is transient. So there's a lack of follow-up that's able to take place. So if more people were deployed and were available to do the tracking, then I think that that could aid in this process. But ultimately, because of the nature of homelessness and the transient, there are folks that are going to fall through these holes, unfortunately, and it's unfortunate.
Kristen, can I ask you a follow-up question? Yeah. I talked to a lot of homeless advocates, and I asked them the question, what services are there available for drug-addicted, mentally ill, homeless people? Are there enough services? And you're saying we need more outreach workers, and I'm sure you're probably right, but what I'm told is that, like the LAZA outreach workers, they mean well, they just don't have much to offer people who are in serious shape on the street. Do you feel that's true?
Absolutely. It's absolutely true. And again, it's because we criminalize poverty and we criminalize mental illness, because again, most people fear that they're going to get jail time. I mean, on our system alone, folks are ticketed for not being able to have fare. And that's also another huge problem. I mean, it's a social service that is being provided, but when we're having to ticket folks who are seeking refuge and shelter, that creates another problem where you're criminalizing being poor. And so I absolutely think that social services are well-meaning, but again, I do think because of the desperation of the situations and folks who resort to drug use, there's a great fear that they're going to be, imprisoned or worse. So yeah, I agree.
So David, can you briefly explain about that 3-year program thing you've been suggesting?
One of the things I was talking with Jake about is that, I think I've talked, and a lot of people have talked about accessibility to treatment and accessibility to mental health services and how important that is. But the other part of that is that for the majority of individuals, relapse is part of their recovery process. Whether it's with addiction or with mental health issues. Most people that have mental health issues return back to the desperation of their mental health due to, as I said before, things like, not being med compliant or not staying connected to services. When it comes to addiction, I can say that there are models out there that have proven to be quite successful. And a lot of them are defined by professional organizations. And so if you're an airline pilot, or you're a medical doctor, or comes from some other profession that requires a certain amount of abstinence, if you're found to be addicted to drugs, they require you to go through a very comprehensive process. And that process includes long-term residential treatment, not the 28-day drop-in residential treatment. I'm talking about 90 days of residential treatment, comprehensive residential treatment. Then they require you to go to a comprehensive long-term outpatient programming things. So, generally up until they've maintained a year's sobriety. So that's continuous counseling, that's continuous outpatient. And then the last component is generally a long-term sense of accountability. So with a lot of those organizations, they require them to be accountable, and by accountable, I mean they require them to do random UAs for up to 3 to 5 years. Now, their success rates with those clients, now, don't get me wrong, I understand you're thinking about, well, we're talking about homeless people, we're not talking about medical doctors, and I understand that they're totally two different beasts. But the reality is, when you put those three components together, the long-term sobriety rate rises from like 20% to like 80%. So it quadruples by requiring that thing. The problem is A, we don't have enough beds funded or the ability to get these people into treatment. But the second part is the system that we have now, we put them into short-term treatment, and then we essentially release them out into the world and say, good luck with this, I hope everything works out for you. And so they eventually end up back homeless, or they end up, having a hard time staying employed, so the real thing is we have to be able to have the resource for these people to get sober in the first place, but we also have to have the resources for them to maintain that sobriety. And that means long-term residential treatment, long-term housing, long-term job services, outpatient treatment, counseling, and some sort of accountability mechanism long-term, not for the short-term period. The 1 year mark seems like a magical number. If somebody can maintain sobriety for 1 year, their chances of maintaining sobriety for the rest of their lives triples. So that 1 year mark seems like a magical mark, and I can go to the brain stuff and everything, you don't want to hear it. But the reality is if we can keep them connected for a year through treatment, permanent supportive housing, whatever it takes to get them, that's really where we see the really, really strong results from the thing. And even then, we're going to have relapse. That's just a part of it. So how easy is it to assess, get services again? I remember years back in some of the counties, they were saying you could only access services a couple times within a 2 year period. And so if a person relapsed multiple times, they couldn't access more of those services.
Okay, thank you, David. It became kind of longer than we planned. So I really appreciate the panel members' passion and then willingness to kind of spend time on this together and then share thoughts with audiences. And I appreciate audiences having a lot of questions and comments. The whole purpose of having these panel discussions is not just kind of criticize failures, but it's more about trying to come up with a solution, better plan. Like we just said at the beginning, like Einstein said, when things are not really working out, we need a different approach, and then we should, have a better plan. So, we today talked about how we could save building cost of housing. So that's one way, but I think there are still a few open questions, like where should we get the land? And then, Cristian was making good suggestions, but we would like to come back, with more data, specific data, the government-owned lands, how much we can utilize, and the transit, we are building up, and then near that area, how much lands could be available when we can use it. So that I want this to be more like a specific and then be kind of clear suggestion for the LA County. And we were talking about building costs today mainly, but how about operation costs, and then can we really afford it? And then what could be done better than what's going on now? And we need to talk about it. And the reason why I'm putting these experts together is when I'm meeting one each, they did their best, like Cristian said, but at the same time, they are kind of frustrated. This is it. We cannot do any better. Because, but when we put these things together and then share thoughts again and then, try to come up with a bigger plan and a bigger idea, sometimes we find the answers, that could not be found by just individually, in a way. So, and the substance abuse issues, we will be talking about it more. And the economic roundtable, they wanted to join but could not join because of the schedule issue. So the second discussion, I think we will definitely invite them again. And also there were a group of doctors who wanted to share their thoughts about what's going on street. So it will be second and third panel discussions going on, and then we'll try to come up with kind of big plan with certain specificity, not just general random ideas. So with that, I thank you very much, panel members and audiences. And thank you. Have a great day.